Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our webinar for the Sloan's Lake Accessory Dwelling Unit Town Hall. We will be recording the town hall and posting it on Facebook after we're done. And we will also add it to the website, the Sloan's Lake bit.ly website. We will start with a presentation from my staff, Naomi Grendens. We will go over next steps, and then we'll go over the Q&As. And I would appreciate if everyone could save their answers for the very end and also use the chat box. It's a great tool for us to be able to see what kind of questions are asked. We have two special guests with us this evening. We have Tina Axelrad, who's the zoning administrator, and we have Mika, who also works for community planning and development. And with that, Naomi, take it away.
Thank you so much, Councilwoman. So I'm going to go through a brief presentation here. We're going to talk about a little bit about what ADUs are, what the zoning and a rezoning for ADUs would look like in Sloan's Lake, and then we'll go into the results of the survey that we've had, feedback we've gotten, both what people are excited about for Sloan's Lake, as well as some concerns about ADUs, and then the research that we've done to respond to those concerns. And lastly, as the councilman said, we'll talk about the outreach plan and next steps. So, what are ADUs? They are known by a lot of names. An ADU is kind of an accessory dwelling unit. That's a bit of a wonky term for granny flat, casita, carriage house, cottages, studios, guest houses. They have a lot of different names. They're actually quite common in Denver, especially carriage houses. So ADUs are regulated and defined very strictly in the Denver zoning code. It is an extra dwelling unit located inside or behind the primary house. And the distinction that there's a couple of different kinds is important because most of the time when we think about accessory dwelling unit, we're probably thinking about a small little cottage or something actually separate on someone's property. But there actually are categories of detached and attached ADUs, which I will show you. So a detached ADU is probably what most of us think about when we think about an ADU. It's located behind the main house. It's subordinate or feels smaller, has less of a presence than the main house. But an attached ADU actually could look a lot like an addition. And the only difference, honestly, from an addition is that this is a designated dwelling unit. It checks all the boxes of what you need to have a standalone unit. So it has things like its own entrance, it has a kitchen, it has plumbing, bathroom, all of that. And then there's also the possibility of doing an attached basement ADU. So a lot of us here in Denver have really awesome basement spaces. Those may already be finished and used for the household, but they also could be converted to be a dwelling unit, again, by adding all those elements that would be required, such as a kitchen, etc. This is an example, actually in Denver, of classic bungalow that has a basement ADU in it, and as you can see it, or rather as you can not see, it's not very visible from the street at all. So there's many very specific regulations and standards related to ADUs in Denver. It is in no way a blank check to just build a second unit, to build another house behind your house. The code actually regulates the overall height and size using things called setbacks here. So you can't put this structure right next to your neighbor's property line. There's limits to how high you can build it. There's even square footage limits. And a lot of that is based on how big your lot is. So the bigger lot you own, the bigger the ADU you can have, but it caps out at a certain number. There's also restrictions on how many people can live in it. I believe it's one person for every 200 square feet. And then there's a lot of other regulations. So it is something that is quite difficult to build in the sense that you need to obey a lot of rules. The ADU has to also look compatible with the main house. And then, very importantly, the land underneath a detached ADU cannot be subdivided or sold off. So you wouldn't end up all of a sudden with a bunch of extra standalone properties that were unrelated to each other. In fact, the owner of the property is the only person that can build an ADU. And that owner then has to continue to live on the property. They can live in the ADU or they can live in the main house, but they have to be on that property. Some things that ADUs are not and are very distinct from, ADUs are not duplexes, they are not apartments, and they are not commercial development. They are an extra unit on a single family, single unit zoned lot. So some of the reasons that many city policies support ADUs in Denver, as well as why people would like to have them, there's kind of four main ones. So financial stability is a big one. If you build an ADU and have a renter in there, that extra income can really help stabilize people. We know that the cost of living in Denver is rising and has risen and is very challenging for a lot of us. And then on the flip side, for the person that gets to live in the ADU, it creates some naturally affordable housing, often in really great neighborhoods that, since we're not, building high rises or anything in single family neighborhoods, and that's not the goal, it's a way to have people able to share these beautiful neighborhoods that might not ever be able to afford a house there. And since ADUs are slightly smaller, they're naturally more affordable. So going down, increased safety. There's a concept called eyes on the street, or in this case, eyes on the alley. And it really refers to the fact that when you've got somebody living on an alley or living on a property there, they simply are aware of what's going on around them. It actually promotes safety. This is a very highly studied thing that can happen. It promotes safety and it promotes caretaking of the alleys. Family strength. A lot of people that we've talked to want ADUs so that they can house family members. Aging in place is actually a really big part of ADUs. The AARP promotes ADUs as a tool for housing as we are all aging. Hopefully we all will be seniors someday, and we all need these places to live. And sometimes your main house you've lived in for years may not fit your needs at that point in time. Maybe you need just one level or something else. Maybe you want to downsize. An ADU is a great place to move into while either renting out your front house or having a family member live there, keeping families together. Or conversely, maybe a returning student or a young family just starting out can live in an ADU and again get that support from being near family. And lastly, neighborhood vitality. It is a tool that can help prevent displacement by simply creating more opportunities for people to live in an area. And in terms of neighborhood character, it is on the continuum of change that can happen. It is a way to add housing without demolishing existing housing and without making drastic changes to a neighborhood, especially as seen from the street. So those are just some reasons city policy in Denver, as well as throughout the country and worldwide, support ADUs. So ADUs in Denver, the zoning code actually has specific zones that allow ADUs, and they are by default allowed in these areas of the city where you can build multi-unit or basically 2-unit or more structures. They're also already allowed in neighborhoods that maybe traditionally had a bunch of ADUs. So we got this zoning code in 2010, just as a bit of background. And so one of the ways that they mapped these areas for ADUs was to where they already sort of existed in the single unit districts. But that's not to say that that zoning intended that places that weren't zoned for ADUs should never have them. It just was simply meant to be something that was addressed later on. But altogether, roughly 25% of the city already does allow ADUs. So we'll zoom in to Sloan's Lake here. These are the areas in Sloan's Lake that already allow ADUs. This is a total of 178 properties, and that's actually 38% of the Sloan's Lake neighborhood already. So that's pretty high, but there still are quite a few chunks that don't allow ADUs. Now, for those areas that are single unit that don't currently have ADU zoning, every property owner has the right to go to the city and request a rezoning to get the zoning for ADUs. The way that the code does that is that you go from one district. So for example, here, USUB, it's a single unit B district. All the rezoning does is you go to a USUB1 district. You get that one at the end of your district. And this is very important because it means that the only change is that you can build an ADU on your property. So this does not change single family zoning. It doesn't change that base zoning for your lot. The only change is that you can create an ADU. You can't build commercial, you can't build a duplex, you can't build higher than you used to. You can just build an ADU per the rules for building an ADU. So as I mentioned, every property owner has a right to go and ask the city for this zoning. And this has been happening a lot in Sloan's Lake. So this really gets to the reason why the councilwoman is proposing to do this for the neighborhood. Because most of the rezonings that the city has seen coming from District 1 particularly are from Sloan's Lake. And I've indicated some of those here with the star. This doesn't even account for ones that are sort of maybe in the pre-process or who have reached out initially. There's some downsides to doing this one-off. It's expensive for the property owner. It's about $1,000, or it is $1,000 each time. And it is a 4 to 6 month process. It can be very complicated and it can be very inaccessible, especially for people who don't feel comfortable engaging with the city that way. The alternative, which we feel would be more efficient and more equitable and are reaching out to you, the neighborhood, to see if this is what you want, is for the councilwoman to sponsor a rezoning for the eligible areas that don't yet have the ADU zoning. So that's what this would look like. You may have seen this map if you went to our landing page. The colored parcels that are called out here are the remaining single unit zones that don't have ADU rezoning. So we've had some people come to us and ask, why isn't my house eligible? The answer is that either it already is zoned for ADUs, or a little more complicated answer is that some properties in Sloan's Lake, such as this chunk up here between Perry and Osceola, are actually still in old zoning. So as I said, we got the current zoning in 2010. There were some properties that for some reason or another didn't carry over. So they are not being included in this current proposal simply because they're a bit more complicated and would need some more individual attention. So we have surveyed people. We hope to get a lot more responses, but so far we're super excited that 194 of you and your neighbors have responded. We've gotten pretty good distribution from throughout the neighborhood as well. But next time you see your neighbor or encounter someone, definitely let them know about this. We'd love to see this entire map colored blue and really hear from everyone. But out of those 194, I will share what people have been saying. So far we have 69% in favor of the rezoning. We've got 20% against, and we've got a 10.8, almost 11% of people undecided who would like more information before they make a decision. We also asked in the survey that if the rezoning goes through, would you be interested in building an ADU? I think this is a really interesting graphic because you can see that about a third of the neighborhood that's responded so far actually has no intention to build an ADU. They just support it for one reason or another. We've got 19% or 37 people who are rearing to go and would love to build an ADU. And I would hazard a guess that these are probably people who have maybe even looked into the rezoning on their own. That would be a very interesting question to ask if this doesn't go through, if you would still go through with an individual, because again, any property owner can go and request a rezoning. And then we've got 92 people or 42% who are thinking about an ADU maybe in the next 3 to 7 years. It's not something they want to do immediately. So we also asked, what is your primary reason for wanting to build an ADU? And the majority, basically a third, said they wanted to use it as a guest house for visiting friends and family. The next category down is you could say you actually didn't plan to build an ADU. But below that, we've got to house a family member. Below that, as a studio or office. And then under that, as for a long-term tenant. So that would be a year-long lease or more. We also had people answer other, and in the write-in option, it was very interesting. Some people said that that other was a gym or a home for a live-in caretaker or a nanny. And then at the very, very bottom, actually, is short-term rentals. And this is very interesting because people are concerned about short-term rentals, and there's a conception that a lot of people want to build ADUs just to use as short-term rentals. So here's some reasons that we got from neighbors for why they support ADUs. A lot was about expanding families, having room for kids, or having room for adult grandparents to move in and help with childcare, or having family members live nearby who couldn't afford it to buy a standalone house. Other people just philosophically thinking this is a good choice for affordable housing. People saying it's a better option than the new boxy homes and duplexes that are coming up, and a way to preserve the character. So reflects a lot of what the research and data have shown about why ADUs can benefit a neighborhood. But we also have concerns, and we want to talk about those. We've done research, and I want to share with you some of the research that we've done in response to some questions that we've had both here and also from this experience in Chaffee Park, because Chaffee Park is also going through a rezoning for ADUs for their whole neighborhood. So first off, there's concern that first responders or other kind of emergency access would be difficult to ADUs. We have talked directly to the fire chief, and he did not share those concerns. He said that they generally do not have problems accessing ADUs, and that also at the time of permitting, when someone goes to build their ADU, that's a time when all these departments have to check off on it being safe and being accessible. So this in general wasn't a concern there. Another question, of course, is about property taxes. Understandably, how will this affect property taxes? Will they go up? Will they go down? We have talked to the city assessor about this, and it's a long and complicated answer, of course, but overall, the city assessor said that the rezoning itself will likely have minimal impact on assessments. However, if an ADU is built, the assessment for that property may go up, just as you would see with any major addition. Because you've improved the property, it's therefore more valuable. Another concern we got was that this might attract developers and scrapes that, hey, we're giving people the ability to build a bit more, and no one wants to see that taken advantage of when this is supposed to be for kind of the neighborhood good. So we also have talked to developers, and we've talked to the West Denver Renaissance Collaborative, which is a pilot program for ADUs down in kind of the Westwood and Athmar Park areas. And we asked them about this, and they've said that they haven't noticed a difference between how attractive development seems to be in areas that have been zoned for ADUs versus areas that aren't. And the developers we talked to also said that ADU zoning isn't necessarily more attractive for a developer. It's not necessarily the thing that would bring them to choose to develop a property versus many other neighborhood qualities, such as access to parks, access to transit, and things like that. And also to point out that as more areas in Denver allow ADUs, any effect that there might exist would be lessened. So other concerns we've heard, that ADUs are just being used to make money and just being used for Airbnb. And this is one of the reasons that we wanted to ask why people would build an ADU in our survey. And so I would direct you to the survey responses if you have this concern. Your neighbors are really saying that that's not why they want to build these. Another concern is about the influence on alleys, that alleys would be cluttered and obstructed. They're already not cared for, and this would just make them worse. And we'll say to that in general, when people start to live in ADUs that are on alleys, that's their front yard, or at least a very important part of their environment, and they actually do tend to care for them more. Another concern is that ADUs put too much strain on the existing infrastructure. We all know, some of us are getting our pipes replaced from Denver Water. And so thinking, oh, this infrastructure is failing, how can we bring more people in here? A really interesting thing that we found actually is that the average household size today, so the number of people that are living, kind of the density, the number of people that are living on properties today is lower by about half than it was when these neighborhoods were built. The average household size right now is, I think, 2.2. And when these were built in, the early 1900s, the average household size was over 4. So these neighborhoods were actually built to accommodate a lot more people than are currently living there. Another thing to point out is that ADU construction tends to be very gradual. In the entire city, there have only been a handful of permits that have been pulled in the last year. And any impacts wouldn't be like you wake up all of a sudden and there are a billion ADUs and they are putting that strain on the infrastructure. It does tend to be very gradual. Another concern that we hear a lot is parking, and parking is very important to a lot of people. So parking is difficult now, and people are concerned that ADUs will make it worse, given that there will be more people coming. And this is a possibility. We don't know. There will be more people. It's just, this may be something where for each of you and for your neighbors to evaluate the benefits over the costs, that there may be ADUs will bring more people. It does mean that there will be that change to the neighborhood. So that is something philosophically to consider. And then very lastly, people don't want to see the current character and density change. And that's understandable. ADUs are a change, like I was saying, we're not going to say they're not. But we would say that they are less impactful than scrapes to the feeling of a neighborhood. And they are designed to not be visible from the street. So again, out of that continuum of change, they are more towards preserving what the feeling of a neighborhood is, especially as you see it from the street. So we'll talk about the outreach plan for a second and then have Q&A. I'll turn it over to the councilwoman now to talk a little bit about, as you can see how we've done so far. We're holding our last town hall, and then how we'll be approaching this over the next month.
Thank you so much, Naomi. That was a great presentation, had a lot of clarity, and you went over a lot of things. And thank you to everyone again who joined us. I see a couple hands raised, and we'll get to you in just a minute. And we see some in the chat box. We have some questions coming up. So for outreach and next steps, what I would like to see is I would like to see more surveys done that are than what's currently. We've actually gotten quite a few. We're at 100 and over 150, I'll say. I haven't talked to Naomi. I can't remember exactly what the exact number, but we would like to get up to the 300s, 400s. So as Naomi mentioned in her presentation, we would love if you talk to your neighbors about that and share the landing page, bit.ly/Sloans Lake ADU, and you can take the survey there. So we're really going to push the survey. Thank you, Naomi, for putting that up on the screen. And if we see a decline in responses, I'll probably flyer the neighborhood again and do more different type of outreach, hit blocks that have not had any participation. And so the survey is really important data for us to gather. And then once the survey, I'll keep it open. I'm thinking I would keep it open until January. I know that as we enter into October and then November, it's Thanksgiving, and then we enter into the holiday season, and the last thing from our mind is taking a survey. So I'll keep it open, and then when we close it, we'll do the analysis on what kind of information we have received from the neighbors and what kind of support. And if I feel like there's enough support to put it through the rezoning process, my office would write an application, and then we would submit it to the City and County of Denver, to their planning department. It would be set for a public hearing at the Denver Planning Board. There, the planning board members talk about it to see if it meets the criteria, and then they vote if it should be moved forward as an application to Denver City Council. And then it goes into a committee and then the committee votes to let it go through the city council process. And then a public hearing and final vote is put onto the agenda at city council, and it's finally voted by myself and my colleagues. So with that, I won't bore you too much with the legislative process, and we'll get to some questions. So I saw one of the attendees, I think she had her hand up. Alyssa, did you have a question? If so, I could allow you to talk. Alyssa, if you are on the call, you are allowed to talk now. If you have a question, I saw your hand up at one point.
Do you know why in 2010 all ADUs were not permitted without a rezoning request?
That's a great question, Alyssa. Tina Axelrad, who's our zoning administrator. Tina, were you with CPD during that time? Do you have an answer? I wasn't working with the city at that time, so I don't know.
Oh, yeah. I actually just answered it in the chat as well, but yes, I was very much here. In fact, I was the project manager, one of the project managers for the adoption of the Denver zoning code in 2010. It really came down to a matter of the clarity of policy in favor of ADUs. At the time, we were working in 2010 to adopt the new code and convert most of the city to be under the Denver zoning code. We didn't have as clear a land use policy in support of ADUs like we do now in the recently updated Blueprint Denver city plan, which very clearly now states a willingness and a favor towards ADUs in many or most residential neighborhoods of the city. Without that policy in place, unless a particular neighborhood came forward and actually asked for it, essentially opted in like Platt Park did in 2010. If you just had plain old vanilla single family zoning in 2009, which didn't have the ADU entitlement, in 99.9% of the cases, you were just flipped over into another single family zone district without the ADU entitlement. And that's what we see in Sloan's Lake.
Thank you, Tina. That's a really, I didn't know any of that information, so thanks for sharing that with us. Do any of the other panelists or attendees have any other questions? You can, if you go to your name, you can raise your hand and then I can unmute you, or you can put a question in into the chat.
And we can start by going down. If I don't see any hands coming up, can start just asking questions in the order that they were asked in the chat. It's always interesting to look at these questions because they run the gamut from questions very specific about properties, which sometimes we can't answer right now because we'd literally, like, we have to know the dimensions of your lot and whatnot. So we'll do our best, but we'll start with a question from Ken. I have a double lot. Can I build an ADU without getting rezoned? And maybe I'll kick that over to Michaela.
Yeah, so right now I think Tina had answered this question in the chat, and it's really dependent on what your zone district is. And so if you currently are not in a zone district that allows ADUs, then you're not permitted to build an ADU. And Tina confirmed that your address is not currently in a zone district that allows ADUs. I know Ken had another question too, which I can answer.
Right, about the garage and maybe kind of existing structures. I know people usually ask about that.
Right. So Ken wrote in the chat, my garage currently shares a boundary line with my neighbor. If I build an ADU above it, would I be required to have the wall moved away from the current boundary? And the answer is yes. So with ADUs, when you establish an ADU use, it has to meet all of the dimensional standards for, in this case, a detached ADU. And so in the Denver zoning code, the setbacks for detached ADUs are 5 feet. Most garages have a 0-foot setback, so they would actually have to be either, they'd have to be modified if you wanted to put an ADU use in that structure, or you would have to prove hardship and apply for a variance, which is kind of a process that allows exceptions to some of the zoning code standards.
Great, thank you for answering that, Michaela, that's great. So Alyssa asked another question. What are reasons why rezone requests are being denied in Sloan's Lake? So that's a very interesting question. And to tell you the truth, not very many accessory dwelling unit rezoning requests are being denied at council. Since I took office a year ago in July of 2019, I cannot think of one rezoning for accessory dwelling unit that has been denied. The reason I'm attempting to do this outreach to see if the neighborhood would be interested in allowing me to be the applicant on your behalf is because of the cost and the time to each neighbor that's doing these on these one-off bases. So I feel like it would be better if we allowed it to go forward as a package and rezone the entire neighborhood instead of each individual house paying the $1,000 fee and going through the 9 to 10 month legislative process that it takes. So long story short, Alyssa, there haven't been any denials of rezonings to date for accessory dwelling units.
Any other questions from people?
Well, we had a town hall on Wednesday and I wasn't feeling very well, I'll admit. And I had some technical difficulties, but we had a robust group of neighbors from the neighborhood who had a lot of questions about infrastructure, which Naomi went over, and actually about the alleys that Naomi talked about having eyes on the alley. And when you have eyes in your alley, you deter unwanted activity that oftentimes happens in alleys. And we got a lot of other questions. One particular neighbor of yours was asking about where is the research that there's the benefit and the burden to each neighborhood, right? When you do rezoning, what were the burdens and to the neighborhood? And actually to be 100% transparent in the work that Naomi's done and the research throughout the United States, there's not a lot of research out there that talks about the burdens to the neighborhood. A lot of the research talks about the benefits. So what we're going to do is I'm working on an initiative in Chaffee Park to do the same thing. And the final zoning, the final vote, the public hearing is November 9th. And Naomi and I are going to gather the questions from the last town hall and some questions that we received during the Chaffee Park rezoning process. And we're going to put together a frequently asked Q&A, questions and answers, and we'll put it on the landing page, because a lot of times what I find is when you're in this type of setting, you're so paying attention to and so intent on watching the material that oftentimes you don't think of questions until afterwards. And oftentimes I'll wake up in the middle of the night and I'll say, oh, what did they mean about that? So if you have those questions that pop up later, you can email my office, and Naomi has the general inbox, which all of us check, district1@denvergov.org. You can email that, and Naomi or myself will get back to you with answers to your questions. And if they're really specific, that's oftentimes when we need help from Tina and other people in the zoning administration to get those answers to us, but we're more than happy to get them to you. So I'll put one last call out. Oh, Sharon, you raised your hand. I'm going to promote you to talk. Sharon, if you just unmute yourself, you should be able to talk now.
Sorry about that.
No
My
problem.
husband is going to make a comment, Brent.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks. I just wanted to talk a little bit about parking because I know it's a big issue. That's my number one concern. And I just kind of want to give a little bit of an example of cars. One of the arguments I know for has to do with density. That has been often stated that, you know, these neighborhoods were built in the 40s and 50s, and the household numbers were much higher then. Those numbers have indeed come down, but auto ownership has more than doubled in those 50 to 70 years. So that's why parking becomes such a big issue for me. I did just a quick analysis of one block, and that has 25 lots on it. These are typical 50 by 120 lots. And if you built a third, which so far, kind of what your numbers show, you know, a third of the people are interested, and I know that's an average. So if you only built a third ADUs on that block, you could add basically 14 to 22 cars to that block parked on the street. And if you go down the street that I looked at, it's currently pretty full because some of these streets do have curb cuts for driveways. So just as a matter of reality, you know, that what's happened in Cap Hill, if you look at the number of cars on the street there, how congested that neighborhood's become and how it's changed the character of that neighborhood, that could indeed happen in our neighborhood. I know it's a worst case scenario, but I think it's something that needs to be discussed and people need to be aware of.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I did some number crunching, and I'll say too, I think comparing an ADU rezoning to Cap Hill isn't quite apples to apples. Cap Hill has 20-story apartments that provide significantly more density. And also, when I was crunching numbers earlier, so I added up the slide that we have that asks people if they would build an ADU. And we really asked this because we did want to think about impact. So overall, it's a third of the people that responded. I don't know if we can extrapolate that to mean a third of the neighborhood. If you look at concrete numbers, that's 130 people that responded that they'd be interested in building an ADU, and that's over the next 7 years, combining the people who wanted to do it now. So 130 ADUs in the Sloans Lake neighborhood out of 1,742 properties is actually only 7.5% of the neighborhood. So again, not quite sure how we can extrapolate that, but I think that if we're going to think about worst case scenarios, this may be also perhaps more accurate data to think about how many actual numbers of ADUs we would get. But yes, you're right, car ownership definitely has gotten higher, and that is something to think about. But I think that the idea that we would all of a sudden become Cap Hill, even if every single property built an ADU, is maybe not so accurate.
And Tina, I'm wondering if you could talk to us about some of the requirements, that specifically the parking requirement about when you build an accessory dwelling unit. Do you have to build a car parking spot with the accessory dwelling unit? I think sometimes that's a confusing point.
Yeah, the easy answer is no. You do not need to provide any additional off-street parking space if you establish a new accessory dwelling unit use on your property. Also be aware that nor would we require you, if you built an entirely brand new single family home, would we require you to put off-street parking with that new home. That's been the tradition in Denver. And, you know, any family household might have multiple drivers in it at any one time. And of course that could change every few years as well. So the number of cars in any particular neighborhood is ebbing and flowing as well. So while someone who might be only 1 or 2 people in the main house might add an ADU with 1 additional driver, or even 2 additional drivers. Next door, it could just be, you know, several children aging into driving mode and adding cars. So it's a little hard to pin it all on ADUs if there are parking challenges in a neighborhood that allows it. You know, but, you know, generally speaking, the more people that live in a neighborhood, generally the more cars there are given ownership rates. And the fact that we don't require is pretty much a function of a desire on the part of the city at a policy level not to put too many barriers in place for single family homes. Does that mean that we're getting all these new homes without parking? Absolutely not. I mean, pretty much the market will demand off-street parking for new homes. But we also have a lot of older urban neighborhoods where parking was never provided, and we don't want those homes to become non-conforming or out of sync or be in any way negatively affected for that fact of history. So that's the history of parking as it relates to single family homes in Denver.
Thank you, Tina. And in the chat, Josh asked a really good question. Josh's comment was, these little bits of technical information, setbacks, and so on are super helpful for those of us who are very interested in developing ADUs. Where are the best places for us to learn more information about our specific situations and lots? And Michaela answered the question and put that they have a residential plan review, the permitting team, every day answering phone calls and emails regarding permitting questions such as these. The number is 720-865-2710, or you can reach them at denvergov.org/zoning, or you can email them at residentialpermits@denvergov.org. And then Ken asked a really good question. How long will the rezoning window stay open to allow building of ADUs? So once a property has been rezoned to allow accessory dwelling units on that land, on that parcel, it's in perpetuity. It stays forever with the land unless it got rezoned to not allow it, which I haven't ever seen, going from allowing accessory dwelling units to taking away that entitlement unless you rezone to add more entitlement, which is a fancy word to add stories or density onto a property. So I hope that answers your question, Ken. And I don't see any other hands up. Do you see any other hands up, Naomi? All right, well, I don't want to take any more of people's time on a beautiful Sunday afternoon, which is beautiful. You know, we want to get outside as much as possible. So with that, I think we could end a little bit early. Naomi, what are your thoughts? Do you think that's okay?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if anyone objects or wants to talk more, definitely let us know. But feel free to email us, and you can also call. And please share this with neighbors. Please share it. And if someone doesn't have the ability to answer the survey online, because we know not everybody has internet access, they are welcome to call our office and we can do it with them. Just do the same thing, but just walking through the phone. So I'll put my direct phone number, which was also on the postcard that was mailed out. I'll put that in the chat. So feel free to have people call that.
And once again, thank you all for joining us on a Sunday afternoon. And just a tidbit why I chose Sunday afternoon is there are some Orthodox Jewish members in the community, neighbors of ours, and Saturdays they're Sabbath. And so I have chosen to do some of my work in the Sloan's Lake in West Colfax on Sundays so that we can get higher participation from that group of individuals. I think they could benefit from the accessory dwelling units as their families are growing as well. So thank you once again for joining us this evening. All information will be on our landing page, which is bit.sloanslake.edu. And as Naomi mentioned, you can always call our office, which is 720-337-7701, or Naomi's main line, 720-337-7704. You can email us at district1@denvergov.org. You can find me on all social media platforms. And again, after this meeting, this tomorrow, we'll download this recording and we'll add it to the landing page and expect to have a Q&A, often asked questions and answers fact sheet on our landing page as well. And I have one call of action. I always say the power of 5. So if I told 5 neighbors about this proposal, if I lived in Sloan's Lake, probably the average 2 to 3 people would take them. And if that neighbor told 5 people, and if that neighbor told 5 people, that's how we create change. So my ask for you is all 5 people, if each individual who's on this call can ask 5 of their neighbors, talk to them. And you can do that social distancing. I know I've been in my front yard doing some gardening lately, and I've been having some chats with my neighbors. And talk about this so that we can move forward and I can know if this is something that I should work on or if I should just work with the individuals who want them done. I can also create a different type of way path forward for just the individuals who want them instead of rezoning the entire neighborhood. Because my goal as your representative is not to pit neighbors against each other. I really want to work to create win-win situations for all of us so that we have the neighborhoods that we love and care for, because as we all know, the saying home is where the heart is. I know my home is where my heart is, and it matters a lot to me. So with that, we'll end a little bit early. And Tina, thank you for taking time as a dedicated city worker to join us on a Sunday evening. Michaela, thank you as well for joining us on a Sunday evening. I can't thank you both enough. Naomi, thank you for joining me and taking time out of your weekend to do these meetings on a Sunday, which isn't always convenient for us, but is more convenient for the people that we represent in Council District 1. And with that, everyone have a good evening. Take care.